This isn't just a love story, it's my quiet journey of healing. In the long night shifts, I met a woman closed off by past pain, and together we learned that real love doesn't need to be loud to be life-changing. It was one of those quiet Friday nights in Rockridge, the kind where the Appalachian Mountains seemed to swallow every sound into the darkness. The old wooden boarding house on the edge of town was mostly silent, with just a faint glow from the hallway lights flickering like forgotten memories. I stood there at 11:47 p.m., my heart pounding harder than it had any right to, wearing my worn denim jacket and holding a small cardboard box in my hands. Inside was a peach pie I'd baked myself, nothing fancy, just something simple and warm, the crust a little uneven from my amateur hands. My name's Ethan Hayes. I'm 26, a white guy who spent most of his life in this sleepy corner of West Virginia. I work the night shift as a security guard at the local warehouse, patrolling empty lots under floodlights, making sure nothing goes missing in the dead hours. It's not glamorous, pays the bills for my tiny room in this boarding house, leaves me enough for gas and groceries, but not much else. I don't have family around anymore. My parents split when I was a kid, and I bounced between them until I struck out on my own at 18. Life's been straightforward since then. Wake up late afternoon, grab a coffee, head to work, come back at dawn. No big dreams, no wild adventures. Just me trying to keep things steady. But for the past 6 months, that routine had a crack in it. A woman named Sophia Ellis who lived in room 2C right next to mine. She's 42, works as the town clerk down at the municipal office, handling paperwork and permits with that quiet efficiency that makes everything seem effortless. I first noticed her on the front steps one morning, when I was coming back from a shift and she was heading out. She had this way about her. Dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a soft smile that never quite reached her eyes, like she was carrying something heavy but didn't want anyone to notice. We started with small talk. Morning, looks like rain today, that sort of thing. Then one day she lent me her umbrella when a storm hit out of nowhere. I returned it the next day with a thank you note, and from there it became a habit. Bumping into each other on the stairs, sharing a quick word about the weather or the noisy neighbors downstairs. I didn't plan on falling for her. It snuck up on me, like fog rolling in from the hills. Sophia was older, sure, but it wasn't about that. It was the way she moved through the world, like she'd seen enough to know what mattered and what didn't. I'd catch glimpses of her through the thin walls, the sound of her kettle whistling for tea, the faint rustle of pages from whatever book she was reading late at night. I started waking up earlier just to accidentally run into her on the steps. I learned to brew mint tea instead of cracking open a beer after work, imagining what it might be like to share a cup with her. She was always polite, always kept her distance, but I saw something in her eyes. A loneliness that mirrored my own, the kind that comes from wandering through life without anyone really seeing you. And tonight, I was done waiting. No more hoping for chance encounters. I'd baked that pie earlier in the day using a recipe from an old cookbook I'd found at the thrift store. It wasn't perfect. The edges were a bit burnt, but it was real, something from my hands. I figured I'd use the umbrella as an excuse. Thanks again for lending it to me last week. Thought you might like this. But really, it was my way of saying what I'd been too scared to voice. I'd fallen for her, hard, and I wanted her to see me, not as the quiet neighbor, but as someone who could be there for her. I knocked once, twice. No answer. The hallway was empty, the only sound the distant hum of a truck on the main road. I turned to leave, feeling like an idiot when the door creaked open. Sophia stood there in a loose sweater that hung off one shoulder, her hair tousled like she'd been reading in bed. She held a half-open book in one hand, her eyes widening just a fraction in surprise. Ethan? Her voice was soft, a little hoarse, like she'd been lost in thought and my knock had pulled her back to reality. She didn't look annoyed, just curious, maybe a touch vulnerable in the dim light. I held up the box, my palms suddenly sweaty. I thought you might be hungry. Baked this earlier. It's peach pie. And thanks again for the umbrella last week. She stared at the box for a few seconds, then at me, her expression unreadable. The air between us felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. Finally, she stepped aside. Come in, the fire's still going, it's warmer inside. My heart slammed against my ribs as I crossed the threshold. Her room was small, like mine, but it felt lived in. A worn armchair by the window, shelves lined with books, a faint scent of chamomile from a teapot on the stove. The fireplace crackled softly, casting shadows that danced across the walls. She closed the door behind me, and for a moment we just stood there, the silence stretching like the mountain fog outside. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the table. "I'll make some tea." I nodded, placing the box down and taking a seat. My mind raced. What was I doing here? This wasn't part of the plan. I'd imagined handing over the pie at the door, maybe a quick chat, not this. But as she moved around the kitchen, pouring water into the kettle, I couldn't take my eyes off her. There was a grace to her, even in something as simple as that, but also a weariness, like the weight of years pressing down. She brought over 2 mugs of tea, sliding one to me before sitting across the table. "You didn't have to do this," she said, opening the box and inhaling the scent. "Smells good. Homemade?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Figured it was better than store-bought. I don't bake often, but I wanted to." She cut a slice, taking a small bite, her eyes closing briefly. "It's good. Really." Then she looked at me, really looked, like she was seeing me for the first time. "Why tonight, Ethan?" "It's late." I swallowed, the words catching in my throat. This was it, the moment I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times, but now it felt raw, exposed. I, I've been wanting to talk to you. More than just hellos on the stairs. I see you every day, and I notice things. Like how you always have a book with you, or how you make tea when it's cold out. And I guess I wanted you to know I'm here. Not just as the guy next door. Her fork paused midair, her expression shifting from surprise to something softer, more guarded. "Ethan, you're sweet, but I'm older. I've got baggage. You don't know half of it." "Then tell me," I said, leaning forward, my voice urgent now. The high of the moment surged through me. This was the climax I'd built up to, the point where everything could change or shatter. "I don't care about the age. I see you, Sophia. The real you, behind the smiles. And I've fallen for that hard. I've loved you from afar for months, but tonight, I couldn't wait anymore." She set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "My husband. Ex-husband. He wasn't kind. Yelling, bruises, locking myself in rooms at night. He cheated, and I stayed too long because I was scared. I left the city, came here to start over, to be invisible. I don't know how to let someone in again. I push people away." The words hit me like a punch, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached across the table, not touching her, just offering my hand. "I'm not him. I'm not here to fix you or rush you. I just want to be present. If you'll let me." She stared at my hand, then slowly placed hers in it. The touch was electric, simple yet profound. In that instant, with the fire crackling and the night pressing in, I knew this was the realest moment of my life. I'd stepped out of the shadows, and for the first time, she saw me too. After that night, I barely slept. I walked back to my room in a daze, the hallway lights blurring as I fumbled with my key. The door clicked shut behind me, and I leaned against it, heart still racing like I'd run a marathon. The pie was gone. Sophia had kept the rest, saying she'd save it for breakfast, but the taste lingered on my tongue, mixed with the warmth of her hand in mine. That single touch had felt like a bridge built in the dark, fragile but real. I didn't turn on the light. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the thin wall that separated our rooms. Through it, I could hear the faint crackle of her fireplace, the occasional pop of wood settling. The glow from her side seeped under the door and across my floor, casting long shadows that danced like memories I hadn't made yet. I replayed every second. Her surprise at the door, the way her eyes softened when she tasted the pie, the tremor in her voice when she talked about her ex. It wasn't just words, it was trust. The kind that doesn't come easy after years of being hurt. I couldn't stay still. I got up and rummaged through my closet, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside was the sweater I'd knitted myself over the winter. Blue wool, nothing fancy. The stitches uneven in places where I'd gotten distracted. I'd learned from an old YouTube tutorial, practicing late at night when the warehouse shifts left me too wired to sleep. It was meant for no one in particular, just something to keep my hands busy. but now it felt like it had been waiting for her. I folded it carefully and set it on my nightstand. Sleep didn't come. I lay there watching the shadows, thinking about how she'd looked in the firelight, tired but open, like a door cracked just enough to let someone in. I wondered what she'd do if I showed up tomorrow with this sweater. Would she laugh? Would she think I was pushing too hard? Or would she see it for what it was? A quiet way of saying I wanted to be part of her warmth. The hours dragged. Around 4 a.m., I heard her kettle whistle again, then silence. She was up too. That thought made me smile in the dark. Maybe she was thinking about the same things. Morning came slow, gray light filtering through my window. The mountains outside were shrouded in mist, the kind that made everything feel hushed. I got up, showered quick, and dressed in my usual jeans and flannel. I wrapped the sweater in the same brown paper, tied it with a scrap of twine, and headed to her door before I could second-guess myself. I knocked softly. The door opened almost right away. Sophia stood there in a thick coat, coffee mug in hand, hair pulled up in a loose bun. She looked like she'd slept even less than I had, shadows under her eyes, but a small, surprised smile when she saw me. "Ethan, early riser today?" I held out the package. "Made this for you. It's a sweater. I knit it. It's not perfect. Stitches are a bit off, but it'll keep you warm." She took it, fingers brushing mine again, and stepped back to let me in. The room smelled like chamomile and wood smoke, the fire still low but glowing. She set her mug down and untied the paper slowly, like she was unwrapping something fragile. When the sweater unfolded, she held it up, running her hand over the wool. Her expression shifted. Surprise, then something deeper, almost tender. She didn't speak for a long moment. "It's blue," she said finally, "like the sky after a storm." I shrugged, feeling heat rise in my face. "Yeah, thought it might match whatever you wear." She slipped it on over her coat. The sleeves were a little long, the fit loose, but it looked right on her. She smoothed the front, then looked at me. "It's warm. Really warm." I nodded. "Good, that's what it's for." She didn't take it off. Instead, she walked to the kettle and poured 2 fresh mugs of tea. We sat at her small table, the same one from last night. The fire popped softly, filling the quiet. After a sip, she spoke. "Ethan, last night I told you about my ex. I didn't plan to, but you listened. You didn't try to fix it or say it wasn't that bad, you just stayed. I wanted to hear it," I said. "All of it." She set her mug down. "He wasn't always like that. At first it was good. Then the yelling started. Little things turned into big fights. He'd leave marks on my arms, my back. I hid them under long sleeves. One night he locked me in the bedroom because I asked why he came home smelling like someone else's perfume. I stayed because I thought I deserved it. Because leaving meant admitting I'd failed." Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened around the mug. "I left the city after the divorce. Came here to disappear. No one knows me. I like that. But it's lonely." I reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "You don't have to disappear anymore. Not if you don't want to." She looked at me then, really looked. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I admitted. "But I'm not going anywhere, unless you tell me to." She stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the mist-covered mountains. Then she turned back, still wearing the sweater. "It fits," she said quietly. "Like it was made for me." I smiled. Maybe it was. We didn't say much more. She poured another round of tea. I stayed until the mist burned off and the sun came through. When I finally left, she walked me to the door, hand lingering on the frame. "Thanks for the sweater, Ethan." "Anytime," I said. As I stepped into the hallway, I glanced back. She was still standing there, wrapped in blue wool, looking a little less alone. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. From the day Sophia put on that sweater, I didn't go back to 2C. Not because I didn't want to. God, I wanted to more than anything. But because fear gripped me like a vice. What if showing up again shattered the fragile thing we'd started? What if her eyes changed, pulling back that openness she'd shown? I replayed her words from that morning, how she'd said it fit like it was made for her. And I wondered if I'd pushed too far already. So I stayed away, burying myself in work, letting the warehouse shifts drag longer than necessary. Mornings, I'd linger in my room until I heard her door click shut, her footsteps fading down the stairs. No more accidental meetings, no more shared tea. 3 days passed like that. I didn't see her at all, not on the steps, not through the window. The boarding house felt emptier, the mist outside thicker, like the mountains were closing in. I told myself she needed space, time to process what she'd shared about her ex. But deep down, I was the one hiding. On the fourth day, I came home from an early shift, the sun barely cutting through the clouds. My room smelled like stale coffee and sawdust from a half-finished shelf I'd been tinkering with to keep my hands busy. I kicked off my boots and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, when a soft knock echoed through the door. It was tentative, like the person outside wasn't sure they should be there. I opened it, expecting maybe the landlord with another complaint about the creaky floors. But it was her. Sophia stood in the hallway, hands clasped in front of her, wearing a simple blouse and jeans, her hair tied back but a few strands loose. She looked hesitant, her eyes searching mine like she was weighing whether to turn around. "Sophia," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "You need something fixed?" She shook her head, glancing down at her feet before meeting my gaze. "No, I came to ask if you still know how to brew tea." I blinked, caught off guard. The words hung there, simple but loaded. I... yeah. Why?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, not waiting for an invitation, and I moved aside to let her in. The room felt smaller with her in it. The dim light from my single lamp casting shadows on the walls, the faint smell of wood dust mixing with the chamomile scent that clung to her. She sat at my rickety table, the one I'd salvaged from a yard sale, and placed her hands flat on the surface like she was steadying herself. "You've been avoiding me," she said quietly, not accusing, just stating a fact. I closed the door and leaned against it, crossing my arms. "I thought you needed time. After what you told me, I didn't want to push." She frowned, a small crease forming between her brows. "You thought, but you didn't ask." The words hit like a quiet slap, not harsh, but enough to make me straighten up. She was right. I'd assumed just like I'd assumed so much before. I walked over and pulled out the other chair, sitting across from her. The space between us felt charged, the unspoken things piling up like the mist outside. "I was scared," I admitted, my voice low. "Scared I'd say something wrong or that you'd regret opening up." She looked at her hands, tracing a finger along the grain of the wood. "I once got hit for asking my husband why he was quiet one night. He said I was prying, that I didn't trust him. It started small, arguments, silence. Then it escalated. Bruises I covered with makeup, doors I locked from the inside. I learned to stay quiet, to not push. I felt my fists clench under the table, anger bubbling up, not at her, but at the ghost of the man who'd done that. "I'm not him," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. "I'd never—" "I know," she interrupted, her eyes lifting to mine. "That's why it hurts that you pulled away. I wear that sweater you made every cold night. I brew tea in the mornings, waiting for your knock. And I'm scared too. Scared of stepping back because of my past." Her words hung there, raw and honest. I leaned forward, the table creaking under my elbows. "Sophia, I feel like I'm not enough. I'm the guy who sweeps floors at a warehouse, watches trucks come and go all night. You're the one who left a whole city behind, started over. I worry if I get closer, you'll see that and regret it." She reached across then, her hand covering mine. The touch was firm, not tentative like before. "I don't need someone to make me forget my past, Ethan. I need someone who won't leave when I remember it." The room went still. I stared at our hands, her fingers warm against my calloused skin. Something broke in me then, the fear, the doubt. I turned my palm up, interlacing our fingers. "I'm not good with words," I said, "but I'm good at showing up. If you're shaking, I'll stand at your door. If you're quiet, I'll sit beside you. And if you need to be angry, I'll be there for that too." She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, white embroidered with a small flower, and handed it to me, though I wasn't the one crying. "When did you learn to talk like that?" I smiled, squeezing her hand gently for the first time. "Since that night I saw you sitting alone. I don't want to be quiet anymore." We sat like that for what felt like hours, the tension easing into something softer. The mist outside lifted, sunlight peeking through the window. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Thank you for letting me in." "Anytime," I said. As she walked away, I realized the distance between us wasn't about steps or walls anymore. It was about daring to cross it when the other person was still waiting on the other side. That afternoon, Rockridge turned unseasonably cold, the kind of chill that sneaks up on you and settles into your bones. Gray rain poured down in sheets, turning the dirt paths around the boarding house into muddy streams. I trudged back from my shift at the warehouse, my jacket soaked through, boots squelching with every step. The mountains loomed like silent guardians, their peaks lost in the low clouds. All I wanted was to peel off my wet clothes, crank up the heat in my room, and maybe brew a pot of coffee to chase away the damp. I fumbled with my key at the door, water dripping from my hair into my eyes. As I pushed inside, something caught my boot, a folded piece of paper wedged under the frame. It was damp at the edges, but intact. I picked it up, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was neat, familiar now after seeing her notes on the communal board downstairs. "I made chicken stew with white wine. No one's ever complained about my cooking being bad, but no one's praised it either. If you're free, 7 o'clock, not a date. Just, I don't want to eat alone today. Essa." I stared at the note, the ink slightly smudged from the rain. My heart did a slow flip. This wasn't like her, Sophia, always so guarded, reaching out first. It wasn't elaborate, no flowery words, but it felt like an olive branch, or maybe more. I glanced at the clock. 5:30, enough time to clean up. I stripped off my wet clothes, hanging them over the radiator to dry. In the mirror, I looked like a drowned rat, hair plastered, eyes tired from the night shift, but this wasn't just any evening. I dug through my closet for the one clean button-up shirt I owned, the kind I saved for job interviews or rare family visits back home. It was plain white, a little stiff from disuse, but it felt right. Respectful. I didn't want to show up looking like the warehouse grunt she already knew I was. By 6:45, the rain had eased to a drizzle, but the air still hung heavy with moisture. I ran a comb through my hair, grabbed my jacket, dry enough now, and headed next door. My knock was firm, not hesitant like before. She opened almost immediately, a small smile tugging at her lips. She was wearing the blue sweater I'd knit, over a simple top, her hair in a loose bun with strands framing her face. No makeup, no effort to dress up, but she looked beautiful in that effortless way, like the mountains after a storm. "Come in," she said. "The rain's making everything dark early." I stepped inside, the warmth hitting me like a wave. The fireplace was going strong, and the air was thick with the scent of stew, chicken, wine, herbs simmering into something hearty and inviting. It smelled better than anything I'd eaten in weeks. She took my jacket, hanging it by the door. "I figured you'd come," she said, handing me a towel for my damp hair. I laughed softly, rubbing the towel over my head. "How'd you know?" "Just a hunch." She led me to the table, already set with 2 bowls, spoons, and a loaf of bread on a cutting board. A bottle of white wine stood open, breathing. She poured 2 glasses into mismatched ceramic mugs, one with a small chip on the rim, the kind of imperfection that made the place feel lived in. We sat, and she ladled stew into the bowls, chunks of chicken, carrots, potatoes, all swimming in a rich broth that steamed invitingly. I took a spoonful, tender, flavorful, with a hint of tang from the wine. "This is good," I said honestly. "Really good. Better than anything I've had in a while." She paused mid-bite, her eyes meeting mine. "You're the first to say that in years." We ate mostly in silence after that, but it wasn't awkward. The rain pattered against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the crackle of the fire. Every now and then, our eyes would catch, hers softer now, less guarded. When she passed the bread, her fingers brushed the back of my hand, light but deliberate. Not an accident. I felt it like a spark, but I didn't pull away. After we finished, she stood to clear the plates. I followed, grabbing a dish towel without asking. She washed, I dried. Our shoulders closed in the small kitchen. The suds foamed under her hands, and I watched her for a moment, the way she moved with quiet purpose. "You know," she said over the running water. I used to think this kitchen wasn't meant for two people. It's too small, too mine. I set a plate down, leaning against the counter. And now? She turned off the faucet, wiping her hands on a rag. Her eyes flicked to the empty corner by the window. Now, I think it just needs one more wooden chair over there. It might fit. The words hung there, simple but loaded. I pulled out the chair from the table, dragging it over to that spot, and sat down, resting my chin on my hands as I looked up at her. What color wood do you think would match? She didn't look away, but her voice carried a hint of laughter. Old wood, like it's been here all along. We stood there in the quiet after that, the stew settling warm in my stomach, the rain softening outside. It wasn't a date, like she said, but it felt like the start of something. Words unspoken, touches tentative, a kitchen big enough for two. 1 month later, the front porch of room 2C had a new addition. A wooden chair in a faded oak stain, one I'd built myself over a weekend in the boarding house's shared shed. No varnish, no fancy joinery, just sturdy legs and a simple backrest, sanded smooth enough to sit on without splinters. I'd hauled the lumber from the hardware store on the edge of town, measured twice, cut once, like my old man used to teach me before he skipped out. It wasn't perfect. One leg wobbled a hair if you shifted wrong, but it was mine, made with hands that knew hard work. Sophia sat in her usual spot, the old rocker she'd probably had since moving in, cradling a mug of chamomile tea that steamed in the cooling evening air. I took the new chair beside her, stretching my legs out onto the porch railing, a sketchbook balanced on my knee. I'd started doodling designs for a small repair shop I was thinking about opening. Nothing big, just fixing locks and doors for folks in Rockidge who couldn't afford the big city locksmiths. The pencil scratched softly against the paper, the sound mixing with the distant call of a whippoorwill from the hills. We didn't talk much. That was our way now, comfortable silences that said more than words ever could. Mornings, I'd knock on her door with a thermos of coffee and a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil, something quick I'd thrown together before my shift. She'd open up, still in her robe sometimes, and we'd share a quiet breakfast on the steps, watching the mist burn off the mountains. Evenings, she'd leave the porch light on, a signal that meant, come over if you're not too tired. I'd show up after work, smelling like warehouse dust, and we'd sit like this, letting the day unwind. We weren't calling each other anything official, no boyfriend or girlfriend, no moving in together. Our rooms stayed separate, doors locking at night like always, but that little porch between us? It had become something bigger, a shared space where walls didn't matter. Two chairs, a railing worn smooth from years of hands, and whatever this was growing between us, quiet and steady like the Appalachians themselves. One afternoon, as the first spring breeze rustled the wind chimes hanging from her window, little brass bells she'd picked up at a flea market, we were out there again. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in gold and shadow. Sophia turned to me, her eyes catching the light with a soft smile. You know, she said, her voice gentle, last year I thought I'd live out my days alone. And I was okay with that, or at least I convinced myself I was. I didn't look up right away, keeping my pencil moving over a rough sketch of a shop sign. I thought the same, I replied, my tone low and even. Figured it was easier that way, no one to let down, no one to lose. She set her mug down on the small table between us, the ceramic clinking softly. But now, I paused, capping the pencil and meeting her gaze. Now, if you took away that wooden chair, I'd have nowhere left to sit. She went quiet, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Then, slowly, she reached over and placed her hand on mine. The touch was light, familiar now, but without the old tremble. It was steady, like a house built on solid ground after a storm. We sat like that as the light faded, the wind picking up just enough to sway the chimes into a soft melody. There was no wedding, no rings exchanged under some grand ceremony, no rushing to blend our lives into one big declaration for the town to gossip about. Rockridge was small, folks noticed things, like how I lingered on her porch more often, or how we'd walk to the corner store together on Sundays. But we didn't explain, we didn't need to. Instead, there were the small things. Me fixing the leaky faucet in her kitchen one rainy afternoon, her leaving a book on my doorstep with a note saying, "Thought you'd like this." Nights when the cold crept in, and she'd wear the blue sweater to bed, telling me later how it smelled like wool and safety. Mornings when I'd wake to her knock, a fresh pot of tea in hand, and we'd talk about nothing, the birds and the trees, the way the mountains change with the seasons. We'd both been hurt before. Her by a man who broke her down piece by piece, me by a life that felt like drifting without anchor. But sitting there on that porch, hand in hand, we found a way to heal without forcing it. No grand promises, no timelines, just showing up day after day. As the stars started to prick the darkening sky, she squeezed my hand. "Even if I don't need anyone," she whispered, "I'm glad you're here." I turned my palm up, holding hers tighter. "And I'll stay. Every day." The wind chimes sang on, a quiet promise in the night. And for us, that was enough.